Victoria, Princess Royal, known within her family simply as Vicky, was Queen Victoria's eldest child and the first of her generation to marry into a foreign throne. From the moment she became Crown Princess of Prussia, her household was expected to produce not just heirs, but the future direction of Europe itself. And it did. Her 8 children included a German emperor, a Greek queen, naval commanders, duchesses, and heirs whose lives ended before they could shape history. Some lived at the center of power, others faded into obscurity, scandal, or exile. A few never reached adulthood at all. This video follows, in strict chronological order, what happened to each of Victoria, Princess Royal's children, from birth and upbringing to careers, marriages, descendants, and long-term legacy. Each life is completed in full before moving to the next, offering a clear, factual account of how the hopes of one ambitious royal mother played out across an entire generation. On the 27th of January 1859, at the New Palace in Potsdam, Victoria, Princess Royal gave birth to her first child. The delivery was difficult. The infant presented in breech position, and the attending physician struggled for hours to complete the birth. When the child finally emerged, he was not breathing. Physicians worked to revive him and eventually succeeded. But the trauma of the delivery had caused permanent damage. The infant's left arm was paralyzed, shorter than the right, and would never function properly. The child was named Friedrich Wilhelm Victor Albert, though he would be known throughout his life as Wilhelm. He was the first grandchild of Queen Victoria and, through his father, Crown Prince Frederick of Prussia, stood in direct line to the Prussian and eventual German throne. The arm injury was immediately recognized as a problem. For a future military monarch in a culture that prized martial bearing and physical capability, any visible disability carried significant implications. From the earliest days of his life, Wilhelm was subjected to various treatments intended to correct or conceal the defect. None succeeded. Wilhelm's upbringing reflected the competing influences within his family. Victoria, Princess Royal, had married Frederick with the explicit intention of shaping Prussia into a constitutional liberal state modeled on Britain. She supervised her son's education personally, employing tutors who emphasized literature, philosophy, and modern languages. The intention was to prepare Wilhelm for enlightened rule. But the Prussian court culture exerted a stronger pull. From an early age, Wilhelm was drawn to military exercises, uniforms, and the rigid hierarchies of the officer corps. His tutors included figures aligned with conservative Prussian traditions, and as he grew older, he began to identify more closely with his paternal heritage than with his mother's British ideals. The Hohenzollern court viewed Victoria's liberal project with suspicion, and Wilhelm absorbed that perspective. The boy's relationship with his parents was marked by formality. Victoria, Princess Royal, held high expectations for all her children, and Wilhelm in particular felt the weight of her disappointment when he failed to meet them. His physical disability became a source of private shame, and he developed compensatory behaviors, aggressive posturing, an emphasis on military prowess, and an insistence on authority that would define his adult personality. As Wilhelm entered adolescence, the distance between him and his mother widened. Victoria, Princess Royal, remained committed to her vision of a reformed Prussia, and she expected her son to share that vision. Wilhelm did not. He was increasingly surrounded by figures at court who reinforced conservative, autocratic principles, and he began to view his mother's political ideals as foreign interference. Frederick III, Wilhelm's father, ascended to the throne in March 1888, but by that time he was already dying of throat cancer. His reign lasted only 99 days. During that brief period, Wilhelm aligned himself with factions opposed to his parents' policies. He participated in efforts to undermine Frederick's authority and positioned himself as the defender of traditional Prussian values against what he saw as his mother's destabilizing influence. When Frederick III died on the 15th of June 1888, Wilhelm became German Emperor and King of Prussia at the age of 29. The transition marked the final break between mother and son. Victoria, Princess Royal, now the Empress Frederick, was effectively sidelined from political life. Wilhelm moved quickly to distance himself from her circle and to assert his own vision of imperial rule. Wilhelm II's reign was defined by personal rule and an assertive foreign policy. He dismissed Otto von Bismarck, the architect of German unification in 1890, and thereafter centralized decision-making authority in his own hands. He expanded the German Navy, pursued colonial ambitions in Africa and the Pacific, and adopted a confrontational stance toward Britain and France. His style of governance was erratic. He made impulsive decisions, delivered inflammatory speeches, and cultivated a cult of personality around the imperial office. Domestically, he resisted constitutional reform and maintained the dominance of the Prussian military aristocracy. His policies contributed to the alliance system that would eventually produce the First World War. During the war, Wilhelm's actual influence over military strategy was limited, but he remained the symbolic figurehead of the German war effort. By 1918, as Germany faced defeat, civilian and military leaders concluded that the monarchy had become unsustainable. Wilhelm resisted abdication but was ultimately forced to accept it. On the 27th of February 1881, Wilhelm married Princess Augusta Victoria of Schleswig-Holstein-Sonderburg, Augustenburg. The marriage was arranged, but it proved stable. Augusta Victoria shared Wilhelm's conservative views and supported his vision of monarchical authority. She was deeply religious, socially conventional, and entirely loyal to her husband. The couple had 7 children, 6 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest, Crown Prince Wilhelm, was born in 1882. He was followed by Prince Eitel Friedrich in 1883, Prince Adalbert in 1884, Prince August Wilhelm in 1887, Prince Oscar in 1888, Prince Joachim in 1890, and Princess Victoria Louise in 1892. The Hohenzollern line was secured, and Wilhelm's sons were raised in the same militaristic tradition that had shaped their father. Augusta Victoria died in 1921. Wilhelm remarried the following year to Princess Hermine of Rus, a widow with 5 children. The second marriage was less significant dynastically, as Wilhelm was by then in permanent exile and had no prospect of returning to power. On the 9th of November 1918, under pressure from civilian and military leaders and facing the collapse of public order, Wilhelm abdicated both the German imperial throne and the Prussian crown. He fled to the Netherlands, where Queen Wilhelmina granted him asylum. He settled at Huis Doorn, a manor house in Utrecht, where he would remain for the rest of his life. In exile, Wilhelm occupied himself with writing memoirs, woodcutting, and correspondence. He maintained the routines of imperial life, surrounded by a small court of retainers. He followed European politics closely and expressed opinions on the rise of National Socialism in Germany, initially hopeful that the movement might restore the monarchy, later disillusioned. Wilhelm died on the 4th of June 1941 during the German occupation of the Netherlands. He was 82 years old. His funeral was attended by a small group of German officers, but Adolf Hitler declined to attend. Wilhelm was buried at Huis Doorn, as he had requested, rather than in Germany. His death marked the end of the Hohenzollern imperial line, and his legacy remains contested. He is remembered as an ineffective leader whose personal failings and poor judgment contributed significantly to the catastrophe of the First World War. On the 24th of July, 1860, Victoria, Princess Royal, gave birth to her second child and first daughter. The child was named Charlotte, and from the beginning she occupied an uncertain position within the family. She was not the heir, and therefore not subject to the intense scrutiny that surrounded her older brother Wilhelm. But she was the eldest daughter, and Victoria, Princess Royal, had clear expectations for how her daughter should be educated and how they should conduct themselves. Charlotte did not meet those expectations easily. She was strong-willed, independent-minded, and resistant to the rigorous intellectual program her mother designed. Where Victoria, Princess Royal, valued scholarship and cultural refinement, Charlotte preferred simplicity and practicality. The differences created persistent friction. Charlotte's education followed the same general pattern as her siblings, tutors in languages, history, music, and religion, but she never displayed the academic inclination that her mother prized. She was more interested in physical activity, outdoor life, and social interaction than in study. Victoria, Princess Royal, found this frustrating and made her displeasure known. The relationship between mother and daughter was characterized by tension. Charlotte felt that her mother was overly critical and demanding. Victoria, Princess Royal, believed that Charlotte was wasting her potential and failing to develop the qualities necessary for a successful royal marriage. The conflict was never fully resolved, and it colored Charlotte's experience of family life throughout her youth. Charlotte was close to her younger siblings, particularly her sister Victoria, but her relationship with Wilhelm was distant. She had little influence within the household and no clear role beyond waiting for a suitable marriage. On the 18th of February 1878, Charlotte married Bernhard III, the hereditary prince of Saxe-Meiningen. Bernhard succeeded his father as reigning duke in 1914, making Charlotte a duchess consort. The marriage was arranged, but it was by most accounts harmonious. Bernhard shared Charlotte's preference for a relatively private, unpretentious lifestyle, and the couple settled into the routines of a minor German court. Saxe-Meiningen was a small duchy, and Charlotte's public role was correspondingly limited. She participated in ceremonial events, supported charitable causes, and managed the domestic affairs of the ducal household. She did not seek a larger political or social presence, and she avoided the conflicts that had defined her relationship with her mother. The Duchy of Saxe-Meiningen was absorbed into the Weimar Republic following the abdication of German monarchs in 1818. Bernhard and Charlotte retained their titles and some of their property, but their official functions ceased. They lived quietly in retirement. Charlotte and Bernhard had one child, a daughter named Feodora, born on the 12th of May, 1879. Feodora was Charlotte's only direct descendant, and the lack of additional children limited the dynastic significance of Charlotte's line. Feodora married Prince Heinrich VI of Reuss in 1898, and through her, Charlotte became a grandmother. Charlotte's health declined in her later years. She suffered from various ailments, and by the time of the First World War, she was largely withdrawn from public life. She lived long enough to witness the collapse of the German monarchies and the transformation of the political order that had defined her youth. Charlotte died on the 1st of October 1919 in Stuttgart. She was 59 years old. Her death received limited public attention, as the post-war period was dominated by political upheaval and economic crisis. Charlotte's relationship with her mother never fully recovered from the tensions of her youth. Victoria, Princess Royal, had died in 1901, and the two women had not been close in the final years of Victoria's life. Charlotte maintained more cordial relations with her father, Frederick III, during his brief reign, but his early death meant that their adult relationship was limited. Charlotte's legacy is modest. She is remembered as a dutiful duchess consort who lived a conventional life and avoided controversy. She produced one child, and through Feodora, her line continued into the 20th century. But she played no significant political role, influenced no major events, and left little mark on the historical record. Among the children of Victoria, Princess Royal, she occupies a secondary position, overshadowed by the more dramatic lives of her siblings. On the 14th of August, 1862, Victoria, Princess Royal, gave birth to her third child and second son. The child was named Albert Wilhelm Heinrich, though he was known throughout his life as Henry. Unlike his elder brother Wilhelm, Henry was not destined for the throne. He was the spare, and his upbringing reflected that secondary status. Henry's childhood was less fraught than Wilhelm's. He was not subjected to the same medical interventions, and he was not burdened with the same dynastic expectations. Victoria, Princess Royal, supervised his education, but she did not invest the same intensity of ambition in him. He was expected to be competent, loyal, and useful, but not necessarily exceptional. Henry was quieter and more reserved than Wilhelm. He avoided confrontation and showed little interest in the political conflicts that divided his family. He was raised to serve rather than to rule, and he accepted that role without apparent resentment. Henry's education emphasized military discipline and technical skill. From an early age, he was directed toward a career in the Navy. The German Empire was in the process of building a modern fleet, and the Navy offered an appropriate outlet for a younger prince who needed a purpose but could not claim the throne. Henry entered naval training as a teenager and proved to be a capable student. He was methodical, diligent, and well-suited to the hierarchical structure of military life. He advanced through the ranks on merit and earned the respect of his fellow officers. Unlike Wilhelm, who often interfered in military matters for political reasons, Henry focused on professional competence. Henry's naval career spanned several decades. He commanded various ships, participated in training exercises, and represented the German Empire in diplomatic and ceremonial functions abroad. He was involved in the expansion of the German fleet and supported the naval ambitions of his brother, Kaiser Wilhelm II, though he did not share Wilhelm's erratic approach to foreign policy. Henry's most significant public role came through ceremonial visits to foreign courts. He traveled to East Asia, where he attended the funeral of the Meiji Emperor in 1912, and he made several official visits to Britain, where he maintained cordial relations with his British relatives despite the growing political tensions between Germany and Britain. During the First World War, Henry continued to serve in the Navy, though his role was largely administrative. He was not involved in major strategic decisions, and by the end of the war, the German fleet had mutinied, contributing to the collapse of the monarchy. Henry accepted the abdication of his brother and the end of the Hohenzollern regime without public protest. On the 24th of May, 1888, Henry married Princess Irene of Hesse and by Rhine, a granddaughter of Queen Victoria. Irene was a carrier of hemophilia, a genetic condition that had affected several members of the British and Russian royal families. The marriage produced 3 sons: Waldemar, born in 1889, Sigismund, born in 1896, and Heinrich, born in 1900. 2 of Henry's sons inherited hemophilia. Sigismund died in 1866 at the age of 4, and Heinrich, the youngest son, suffered from the condition throughout his life. Waldemar, the eldest, died in 1945, and through him, Henry's line continued into the later 20th century. The family's experience with hemophilia was a source of ongoing anxiety, but Henry and Irene managed the condition with the resources available to them. The marriage was stable and affectionate. Henry and Irene shared a preference for privacy and lived relatively quietly compared to other members of the Prussian royal family. They maintained homes in Kiel and Himmelmark, and they participated in court life when required, but they avoided the political intrigues that had characterized Henry's mother's household. Henry maintained a generally harmonious relationship with his parents. He did not engage in the conflicts that had defined Wilhelm's relationship with Victoria, Princess Royal, and he avoided taking sides in the ideological disputes that divided the family. Frederick III's brief reign did not significantly alter Henry's position, and after his father's death, Henry continued his naval career without incident. Henry's relationship with Wilhelm was correct but not warm. He supported his brother's reign in public, but privately he was critical of Wilhelm's impulsiveness and poor judgment. After the abdication in 1918, Henry lived quietly in retirement, avoiding political activity and maintaining a low profile. Henry died on the 20th of April, 1929, in Himmelmark. He was 66 years old. His death was noted in the press, but it did not generate significant public attention. He was remembered as a competent naval officer, a devoted family man, and a minor member of the Hohenzollern dynasty who had served his role without distinction but also without scandal. On the 15th of September 1864, Victoria, Princess Royal, gave birth to her 4th child and 3rd son. The child was named Franz Friedrich Sigismund, though he was called Sigismund within the family. He was a healthy infant, and there is no indication in contemporary records that his early development was unusual in any way. Sigismund's position within the family was that of a younger son. He had no claim to the throne and no defined future role. He was expected to be raised alongside his siblings, educated in the manner appropriate to a Prussian prince, and eventually to find a place in military service or court life. In the spring of 1866, Sigismund fell ill. The exact nature of his illness was not immediately clear, but it progressed rapidly. Contemporary accounts suggest that he developed meningitis, an infection of the membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord. Medical intervention was limited, and the infection proved fatal. Sigismund died on the 18th of June, 1866, shortly before his 2nd birthday. His death was the first significant loss experienced by Victoria, Princess Royal, in her role as a mother. She had Redi endured the complications of Wilhelm's birth and the ongoing difficulties of raising him, but Sigismund's death introduced a different kind of grief. Victoria, Princess Royal, wrote extensively about the loss in letters to her mother. Queen Victoria, she described her sorrow in measured terms, but the emotional impact was evident. The death also affected Frederick, who had been a devoted father despite his limited time with his children due to his military and political responsibilities. Sigismund was buried in the Hohenzollern family mausoleum, and his death was noted in official court records. But because he died so young, he left no independent legacy. He is remembered only as one of the children of Victoria, Princess Royal, who did not survive to adulthood. On the 12th of April, 1866, less than 2 months before Sigismund's death, Victoria, Princess Royal, gave birth to her 5th child and 2nd surviving daughter. The child was named Victoria after her mother and grandmother, and she was called Moretta within the family to distinguish her from the other Victorias in the extended royal network. Victoria grew up in close proximity to her mother. She was educated according to Victoria, Princess Royal's exacting standards, and unlike her elder sister Charlotte, she proved to be an attentive and capable student. She learned languages, studied music and art, and developed the cultural refinement that her mother valued. The relationship between mother and daughter was affectionate, and Victoria became a trusted companion. As Victoria entered adulthood, she remained unmarried longer than was typical for royal daughters. Various potential matches were discussed, but none materialized. Victoria, Princess Royal, was reluctant to see Victoria leave, and Victoria herself showed no urgency to marry. She served as her mother's secretary and companion, particularly during the final years of Victoria, Princess Royal's life, when she was suffering from cancer. Victoria's education was comprehensive. She was fluent in English, German, and French, and she had a solid grounding in history, literature, and the arts. She was musically talented and participated in the cultural life of the Prussian court. She was also politically aware, absorbing her mother's liberal perspectives and maintaining correspondence with relatives across Europe. After Frederick III's death in 1888, Victoria, Princess Royal, lived as the Dowager Empress Frederick, increasingly isolated from the centers of power. Victoria remained with her, managing correspondence, receiving visitors, and providing emotional support. This period solidified Victoria's role as the dutiful daughter, but it also limited her opportunities for independent life. On the 19th of November, 1890, Victoria married Prince Adolf of Schaumburg-Lippe. Adolf was the reigning prince of a small German state, and the marriage offered Victoria a position as a reigning princess consort. The marriage was not arranged solely for dynastic reasons. There is evidence that Victoria and Adolf had developed a mutual affection. However, the marriage was not successful in producing children. Victoria and Adolf remained childless throughout their union, a fact that limited the dynastic significance of the match. The couple lived in Buckeberg, the capital of Schaumburg-Lippe, and Victoria carried out the ceremonial and charitable duties expected of her position. Adolf died on the 8th of May, 1916, during the First World War. Victoria was left a widow at the age of 50. She retained her status as Dowager Princess, but the collapse of the German monarchies in 1918 meant that her official role came to an end. In 1927, at the age of 61, Victoria remarried. Her second husband was Alexander Zubkov, a Russian adventurer of questionable background who claimed aristocratic connections. The marriage was socially scandalous. Zubkov was significantly younger than Victoria, and he had no legitimate claim to noble status. The Hohenzollern family disapproved, and the marriage was widely regarded as a mistake. Zubkov proved to be financially irresponsible. He mismanaged Victoria's resources, incurred debts, and involved her in legal disputes. The marriage deteriorated rapidly, and within a few years, Victoria separated from him. The experience left her financially diminished and socially embarrassed. Victoria's final years were marked by financial hardship and social isolation. She lived in modest circumstances in Bonn, supported by limited resources and distant from the royal circles that had defined her earlier life. She maintained correspondence with surviving relatives, but she was no longer a figure of public significance. Victoria died on the 13th of November, 1929, in Bonn. She was 63 years old, her death received limited attention, and her legacy is mixed. She is remembered as a devoted daughter who supported her mother through difficult times, but also as a woman whose later decisions, particularly her second marriage, undermined her dignity and left her in difficult circumstances. She produced no children, and her line ended with her death. On the 10th of February 1868, Victoria, Princess Royal, gave birth to her sixth child and fourth son. The child was named Joachim Friedrich Ernst Waldemar, though he was known as Waldemar. He was a healthy child, and contemporary accounts describe him as lively, curious, and affectionate. Waldemar's early years were relatively normal for a Prussian prince. He was educated alongside his siblings, participated in family activities, and showed promise as a student. Victoria, Princess Royal, doted on him, and his early development gave no indication of the tragedy that would follow. Waldemar was close to his younger sisters, Sophie and Margaret, and he was a favored child within the household. He had no significant public role, as he was far removed from the line of succession, but he was expected to pursue a military career in due course. In early 1879, a diphtheria outbreak swept through the Prussian court. Diphtheria is a bacterial infection that affects the throat and airways, and in the pre-antibiotic era, it was often fatal. Several members of the extended Hohenzollern family contracted the disease. Waldemar fell ill in March 1879. Despite the efforts of court physicians, his condition deteriorated rapidly. He died on the 27th of March 1879 at the age of 11. His death was a profound shock to Victoria, Princess Royal, who had already lost one son in infancy and now faced the loss of another child. The impact on the family was significant. Victoria, Princess Royal, wrote extensively about her grief, and Frederick was deeply affected. The loss of Waldemar, who had been healthy and full of potential, was particularly difficult to accept. The family mourned publicly, and Waldemar's death was widely reported in the German and British press. Waldemar was buried in the Hohenzollern mausoleum, and his memory was preserved within the family. But like Sigismund, his early death meant that he left no independent legacy. He is remembered as a promising child whose life was cut short by disease. On the 14th of June, 1870, Victoria, Princess Royal, gave birth to her seventh child and third surviving daughter. The child was named Sophie Dorothea Ulrike Alice, though she was known simply as Sophie. She was born during a period of significant political upheaval. The Franco-Prussian War had begun weeks earlier, and her early life was shaped by the transformation of Prussia into the German Empire. Sophie's education followed the pattern established for her sisters. She was taught languages, music, history, and religion, and she was prepared for the role of a foreign princess consort. Victoria, Princess Royal, took an active interest in Sophie's development, and Sophie proved to be an intelligent and capable student. Unlike her elder sister Charlotte, Sophie did not resist her mother's expectations. She absorbed the lessons she was taught, developed strong opinions, and maintained close ties with her mother throughout her life. She was also close to her younger sister Margaret, and the two remained in regular correspondence for decades. On the 27th of October, 1889, Sophie married Constantine, the Crown Prince of Greece. Constantine was the eldest son of King George I of Greece, and the marriage aligned the Hohenzollern dynasty with the Greek royal house. The match was arranged, but it proved to be personally successful. Sophie and Constantine developed a genuine partnership, and Sophie adapted to life in Greece with relative ease. The transition required significant adjustment. Sophie was raised in the Lutheran tradition, and Greek Orthodoxy was the state religion of Greece. She converted to Orthodoxy in 1891, a decision that caused friction with her mother and the broader Hohenzollern family. But Sophie believed the conversion was necessary to fulfill her role as a Greek princess, and she committed to it fully. Constantine ascended to the Greek throne in 1913, following the assassination of his father. Sophie became Queen of Greece at a time of political instability. Greece was involved in the Balkan Wars, and the country's political factions were deeply divided over foreign policy and domestic governance. During the First World War, Greece's position was complicated by the competing sympathies of its leaders. Constantine favored neutrality and maintained ties with Germany. a position influenced by his German heritage and family connections. Sophie supported her husband's stance, but this placed them in opposition to the Allied powers, particularly Britain and France. In 1917, under pressure from the Allies, Constantine was forced to abdicate. He and Sophie went into exile in Switzerland. Their eldest son, Alexander, was installed as king, but he died in 1920 under controversial circumstances. Constantine was recalled to the throne in 1920, and Sophie returned as queen. The second period of Constantine's reign was brief. Greece suffered a catastrophic defeat in the Greco-Turkish War of 99 to 1922, and in 1922, Constantine was forced to abdicate again. He and Sophie went into exile in Italy, where Constantine died in 1923. Sophie was widowed at the age of 52. Sophie and Constantine had 6 children: George, born in 1890, Alexander, born in 1893, Helen, born in 1896, Paul, born in 1901, Irene, born in 1904, and Catherine, born in 1913. 3 of Sophie's sons eventually became kings of Greece. George reigned from 1922 to 1924, and again from 1935 to 1947. Paul reigned from 1947 to 1964. Alexander's brief reign from 1917 to 1920 ended with his sudden death. Sophie's daughters also made significant dynastic connections. Helen married Carol II of Romania and became queen consort. Irene married the Duke of Aosta, a member of the Italian royal family. Catherine married a British commoner after the fall of the Greek monarchy. Through her children and grandchildren, Sophie's influence extended across European royalty. Her descendants include Constantine II, the last king of Greece, and Queen Sophia of Spain, who was named after her great-grandmother. After Constantine's death, Sophie lived quietly in exile. She moved to Frankfurt, where she remained for the rest of her life. She maintained correspondence with her surviving siblings and followed the political developments in Greece from a distance. She witnessed the continued instability of the Greek monarchy and the eventual establishment of a republic. Sophie died on the 13th of January 1932 in Frankfurt. She was 61 years old. She was buried beside Constantine in Florence, and her death marked the end of one of the more dramatic lives among the children of Victoria, Princess Royal. She had been a queen twice, endured exile twice, and witnessed the collapse of the monarchy she had been raised to support. Her descendants continued to play significant roles in European royalty well into the late 20th century. On the 22nd of April, 1872, Victoria, Princess Royal, gave birth to her 8th and final child. The child was named Margaret Beatrice Feodora, though she was known as Margaret. She was the youngest of the siblings, born when her mother was 31 years old and her eldest brother Wilhelm was already 13. Margaret's childhood was shaped by the established routines of the Prussian court. By the time she was born, Victoria, Princess Royal, had refined her approach to child rearing, and Margaret benefited from a stable, well-organized household. She was educated in the same manner as her sisters, and she developed close relationships with her immediate siblings, particularly Sophie. Margaret was less politically engaged than some of her siblings, but she was well-informed and maintained an active correspondence network throughout her life. She was described by contemporaries as practical, level-headed, and adaptable, qualities that would serve her well through the dramatic events of the 20th century. On the 25th of January, 1893, Margaret married Prince Frederick Charles of Hesse. Frederick Charles was a member of the Hesse Castle branch of the Hessian royal family, and the match was arranged but personally agreeable. The couple settled in Kassel, and Margaret assumed the role of a German princess consort. The marriage produced 6 sons: Frederick Wilhelm, born in 1893, Maximilian, born in 1894, Philip, born in 1896, Wolfgang, born in 1896. Maximilian and Wolfgang were twins. Richard, born in 1901, and Christoph, born in 1901. Richard and Christoph were also twins. Margaret's household was dominated by the practical demands of raising 6 boys, and she managed the family with competence and discipline. Her sons were raised in the Prussian military tradition, and several pursued careers in the German armed forces. The family's fortunes were closely tied to the fate of the German monarchy, and the end of World War I brought significant disruption. The First World War had a devastating impact on Margaret's family. Her brother, Kaiser Wilhelm II, presided over the German war effort, and her sons were of military age. The war ended with Germany's defeat and the abdication of the German monarchies, including the Hohenzollerns and the Hessian ruling houses. Margaret's husband, Frederick Charles, had briefly served as King of Finland in 1918, elected by the Finnish parliament during a brief period of Finnish independence. But the position was never formalized, and Frederick Charles never actually reigned. The collapse of the German war effort ended the project before it could begin. In the post-war period, the family's status and resources were significantly reduced. They retained some property and titles, but the political and social order that had defined their lives was gone. Margaret adapted to the new reality with the same practicality she had shown throughout her life. Margaret lived through the entire interwar period, the Second World War, and the early years of the Cold War. She witnessed the rise of National Socialism, the devastation of another world war, and the partition of Germany. Several of her sons were involved in the Nazi regime, a fact that complicated the family's post-war reputation. Philip and Christoph, in particular, were active members of the Nazi Party. Despite these associations, Margaret herself maintained a low profile. She lived quietly in Germany, supported by family resources and private means. She avoided public political activity and focused on family matters. Margaret lived longer than any of her siblings. She outlived Wilhelm, Charlotte, Henry, Victoria, Sophie, and all the siblings who had died in childhood. She became the last living link to Victoria, Princess Royal, and the last direct witness to the world of the Prussian court before 1914. Margaret died on the 22nd of January 1954 in Kronberg. She was 81 years old. Her death marked the end of the generation of children born to Victoria, Princess Royal. She had lived through 2 world wars, the collapse of multiple monarchies, and the transformation of Europe's political landscape. Her legacy is complex. She produced 6 sons, all of whom survived to adulthood, and through them, her line continued into the late 20th and early 21st centuries. But her son's involvement with the Nazi regime has cast a shadow over the family's historical reputation. Margaret herself is remembered as a survivor, a woman who adapted to changing circumstances and maintained her family through periods of extraordinary upheaval. The 8 children of Victoria, Princess Royal, lived lives that ranged from imperial power to quiet obscurity, from early death to long survival. Wilhelm II became German emperor and was forced into exile. Charlotte lived as a duchess in a minor German state. Henry served honorably in the navy and avoided political controversy. Sigismund and Waldemar died as children. Victoria remained close to her mother but ended her life in difficult circumstances. Sophie became a queen twice and endured exile twice. Margaret outlived them all, witnessing the complete collapse of the world into which they had been born. Their collective story reflects the fragility of dynastic ambition and the unpredictability of historical forces. Victoria, Princess Royal, had hoped to shape the future of Europe through her children. Instead, her children experienced the end of the European monarchical order and the rise of a fundamentally different world. Some adapted, some did not. But all of them lived through one of the most transformative periods in European history, and their lives offer a window into the personal dimensions of that transformation.